Join us as we venture into Paris. I've been to Paris before, but this is my first time back in almost 20 years. A lot has changed. I'm here now with my wife and our kids, turning this into a true family trip, and I'm honestly excited, not just to see Paris again, but to experience it through their eyes. Paris is known the world over. There's so much to see, so much to do, and in just a few days, we're going to try to take in as much of it as we can. We'll show you everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And yes, even a few embarrassing moments I probably wish I could take back. This trip is a learning experience, not just for you watching, but for us as a family as well. Thanks for joining us on this adventure. Let's get started by taking the train from London to Paris. The train from London to Paris doesn't take very long, about 2.5 hours. On this vacation, one of our main goals was to maximize the time we spent actually exploring, so we didn't want to waste valuable daylight sitting on a train. That's why we booked a super early train. We left really early in the morning and arrived at the train station with plenty of time. The last thing you want is to miss your train or stress about timing. I strongly recommend doing the same. A quick tip about breakfast and expenses. Taking an Uber to the station and buying food there can get expensive. If your accommodation has a kitchenette, make breakfast there before leaving. It'll save you money. We did that and it helped a lot. Of course, once you're at the train station, you're a captive audience. So if you're hungry, your only option is the station food. Prices are elevated, but there's a good variety of things to eat while you wait. Regarding train ticket costs, we booked our tickets well in advance, which I highly recommend. You can save around $50 per ticket this way. We paid $52 per person for a one-way trip, which was a great deal. For the entire family, the one-way trip came to just over $300. When it came to getting to the train station, we took an Uber. The reason? We were leaving really early in the morning, and while we didn't have an enormous amount of luggage, we had enough that we didn't want the hassle of taking the bus. We were also concerned about getting lost or running into challenges, so Uber felt like the cleanest and safest option. Normally, while we were in England, we relied mostly on the bus system, which worked fine. But for this early morning train, we decided Uber was the smarter choice. It actually saved us money compared to a cab, and the ride was quick, only about 25 minutes from our Airbnb to the station. We took a large Uber that could carry up to 6 people, and it cost $56. When it comes to the train ride, this was something we were really excited to experience. Moving from city to city, taking a flight just seemed too long and cumbersome. The train felt far more efficient, comfortable, and even less expensive. Plus, we had watched plenty of videos of people riding the trains, and we wanted to see it for ourselves. There are some scenic train rides on this route that are definitely worth staying awake for. This one, not so much. You do get glimpses of different parts of England, seeing local communities from the window, but then the train goes underwater through the English Channel. For most of that stretch, all you see is black tunnel, which makes it a perfect chance to catch up on some sleep if you're leaving early. Once the train emerges on the other side, there's not much in the way of scenery. One amusing observation, across both locations, it seems people like to mark their territories with graffiti. So unless you're a graffiti enthusiast, it's probably a good time to take a nap. Let's talk a bit about what to expect on the train. First, if you need help, staff on site are very accessible and speak multiple languages. Even though we had our tickets ahead of time, it was easy to figure out where to go and which train to get on. Safety is important. What we did was put all our major belongings, passports, money, valuables, into one backpack that stayed under my control. My wife and I sat together, so we always knew where it was. For luggage, we used the overhead racks when possible, but mostly we wanted our bags close so we wouldn't worry about them while sleeping or during stops. The key takeaway, keep valuables close and under someone's watch. Ideally, the person who is the most reliable. One disappointment. None of the trains we rode offered complimentary drinks, not even a glass of water. So if you're on a long trip, bring your own snacks or food and wear comfortable clothing, because staring out the window gets boring and eventually you'll want to nap. One thing that worked really well for us, the train ride became a family regroup time. We talked to the kids about what to expect next, reflected on what went well, and discussed plans for the upcoming leg of the journey. When we were sitting together, this worked great. When we were more spread out, not so much. But it's a perfect opportunity to connect with your family during travel. Finally, a big tip about luggage, pack light. Our bags were small because we did laundry at each stop. which made moving around much easier. If you can't lift or manage your own bags, you've packed too much. Using washer, dryer facilities along the way lets you travel lighter and more comfortably, especially on trips lasting several weeks. One of the things you have to do in Paris, the number one attraction by far, is the Eiffel Tower. So here's what our experience there was like. When you plan a visit, there are a few things you should know. First off, there are different levels, and depending on your energy, you can take the stairs or the elevator. The stairs go up to the second floor and give a really different experience, but the elevator can take you all the way to the top. Tickets should be booked in advance, especially if you want to go up. The tower gets crowded and poor weather can really impact your day, so the earlier you go, the better. Prices vary depending on whether you take stairs or elevator or if you want to reach the summit. When you arrive, you'll notice the crowds and the vendors selling souvenirs on the ground floor. If you like haggling, this is the place for you. If not, just try to move through and focus on the experience. And definitely use the bathroom before heading up. Once you're in line or on the stairs, it's not easy to step away. Once you're up, the views are amazing. You can see the Seine, rooftops, and landmarks all across Paris. It's busy, but it's still a moment worth taking in. We thought about getting a guide, but with how crowded it was, we decided to explore at our own pace. Sometimes it's better just to enjoy the views with your family rather than follow a tour. My advice, get your tickets early, go early, use the bathroom first, and take your time at the top. Whether you're with kids or on your own, the Eiffel Tower is a must-see. Just be ready for the crowds and enjoy the view once you get up there. Before we got to the Eiffel Tower, the first thing we did when we arrived in Paris was check into our Airbnb. We wanted to drop off our luggage, know where everything was, and just regroup and reset after the trip. Our Airbnb was in a residential neighborhood where most of the people living nearby actually lived there, not a touristy area, which we liked. One of the best perks was that right outside there was a supermarket. Once we got settled, we walked over, grabbed a few drinks, snacks, and some breakfast food, and headed back. Now, this Airbnb was actually our smallest one on the trip. It had a really tight staircase. I honestly have no idea how they got furniture up there. The space itself was pretty eclectic. It had 2 levels. On the first floor, a living area and a bedroom, and on the upper level, more beds and a full bathroom. In total, there were 2 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, and even a pull-out sofa in the living room. The reality is, we didn't spend a lot of time in the Airbnb. Our goal was to see Paris and the other countries we were visiting, so the Airbnb just needed to be comfortable enough to stay in, with a good bed and enough space to regroup. You're not paying all that money to stay in your room, you're paying to get out and explore. One thing to note about Paris, accommodations tend to be expensive and you won't get much living space. We paid $152 per night for our apartment. The good news for us was that our Airbnb wasn't far from downtown Paris, just a short train ride away. That actually helped us get more familiar with the Paris train system than we had been in London. That being said, the Paris trains are a story all on their own. Spoiler alert, we were not super happy with them, but we'll get into that a little later in the video. In this video, we're focusing on everything we did in Paris, but I want to be really clear about this. You're not limited to staying in Paris. One of the biggest surprises for us was how easy and affordable it is to leave the city for a day trip. And one of the day trips we took was to Versailles. A big reason we went was because my wife really wanted to go, and honestly, I'm glad she did. Getting there was incredibly easy. We took a train right from near our apartment, and the ride was only about 45 minutes one way. And here's the part I really loved. It was a 2-level train. I had never been on one before. I didn't even know they existed, which feels a little embarrassing to admit as a travel YouTuber, but it's true. We sat on the upper level, which for whatever reason was super hot, but still a lot of fun. I was up there with my daughter, and it turned into one of those simple travel moments you remember. The ride itself was enjoyable because you get to see different parts of Paris and then gradually move out into more open areas. One of the best parts about traveling to Versailles was how inexpensive it was. The train ticket cost cost about $2.50 one way. So round trip, you're looking at roughly $5 total. That's it. For a trip to one of the most famous palaces in the world, that felt like a steal. Even the admission cost was reasonable. Tickets to Versailles were around $22 per person, which, considering how massive and historic the place is, felt completely worth it. And Versailles itself, it's incredible. The grounds are huge and immaculately kept, and the palace is absolutely breathtaking. Walking through it, you're surrounded by massive rooms, life-size paintings, gold details everywhere, and beautifully preserved furniture. Once you learn the history and understand how large the palace once was, and realize it's actually smaller than it used to be, it's pretty mind-blowing. The amount of craftsmanship and talent that went into building something this elaborate is hard to comprehend. One thing to know before you go, Versailles takes time. This is not a quick stop. You'll be walking a lot, especially if you explore the gardens, so wear comfortable shoes. The palace itself can get very crowded, but once you get outside, the gardens give you room to breathe and slow things down. If you're watching this and wondering whether Versailles is worth doing as a day trip from Paris, my answer is absolutely yes. It's easy to get to, surprisingly affordable, and it ended up being one of the highlights of our time in France. One thing we did in London that we absolutely wanted to do, again in Paris, was the biking experience. For us, biking is such an earthy, ground-level way to see a city, and Paris turned out to be perfect for it. We rented electric bikes, kept them for the entire day, and it ended up being one of the highlights of our vacation. Riding along the Seine, cutting through neighborhoods, and casually passing landmarks lets you see Paris in a way you just can't from a bus or the metro. You're not limited by train stops, and you can reach areas you'd never get to on foot in a single day. We biked all over the city, and it gave us an incredible sense of freedom. Now, renting electric bikes isn't inexpensive. You're looking at around $50 per bike for the day, but because they're electric, you're not burning yourself out. You get all the distance without all the exhaustion, and by the end of the day, you're tired, but not wiped out. That said, there is one unavoidable downside: saddle sores. There's really no way around it. If you're not used to being on a bicycle all day, spending hours on a seat, even an electric bike where you're not pedaling much, can be pretty uncomfortable. For some people, that discomfort can turn into actual pain. It's just one of those things you should know going in. Biking with kids adds another layer. You can't go as fast as you might want to, and you definitely can't take risks. We had to be very strict about following turn signals, stopping when the light wasn't green, and not trying to sneak through intersections. That slows you down a bit, but honestly, safety comes first, especially in a busy city like Paris. A couple of tips if you do this. If you're renting for the whole day, get to the bike shop as soon as it opens so you can maximize your time. And make sure you're back at least an hour before closing so you're not racing the clock across the city. Another big recommendation is to plan your route ahead of time. Since you can see so much on a bike, it really helps to map out where you want to go, plug those stops into your GPS, and move from place to place intentionally. If you only have 1 or 2 days in Paris, biking is one of the best ways to see a lot in a short amount of time. Despite the saddle soreness and the slower pace with kids, the biking experience was absolutely worth it for us. It let us see Paris on an entirely different level, and it's something I would do again without hesitation. Unfortunately, not everything in Paris was perfect. While we look at a few things we did in Paris, we will talk about them. There were 2 major sour spots for us, and both really frustrated us. First, the Paris metro. Honestly, even now, I don't fully understand how it's supposed to work. On paper, there are temporary travel passes, cards, lines, rules, but in practice, it felt confusing and chaotic. We tried to get a pass and ended up waiting in line for at least 2 hours, only to have the internet suddenly go down, which shut everything down and basically left the queue in limbo. That entire fiasco added unnecessary stress to what should have been a simple ride. What adds to the confusion is that the system has changed recently. The classic paper tickets are being phased out, and instead, the transit authority now pushes travelers toward a plastic or digital pass like Navigo Easy or other electronic passes. Validation is mandatory every time you enter, and you must tap or scan correctly at the turnstile. If you don't, even by mistake, inspectors can come out of nowhere and you could get fined. that's not just theoretical. There are plenty of reports from other travelers who have complained. Riders' passes were rejected at the gate, forcing them to wait, argue with staff, or even get fined. One user summed it up simply: sometimes the gates or machines don't work right, or they mark tickets incorrectly. We were stopped and delayed for 23 minutes. For us, with a family, luggage, tired kids, that uncertainty and the possibility of being stuck or fined added real stress. It turned what should have been a convenient way to get around into anxiety, wasted time, and frustration. The second big sour spot, booking attractions via a third-party travel pass service, in our case, CityPass. We'd used similar services from CityPass before in the US with no issues, but abroad it felt like everything fell apart. We had major difficulties getting support, and in some cases lost out on experiences altogether. We ended up spending time and energy trying to fix problems or understand why something wasn't working. Time that on a European vacation is precious and irreplaceable. For my wife, it caused a lot of unnecessary stress and disappointment. Worst of all, because of those issues, we lost money and, more importantly, time. If you're traveling internationally where schedules are tighter and you want to make the most of every day, the last thing you want is to spend an hour or two just trying to figure out why your all-in-one pass didn't work. If I were you and planning a trip now, I'd say skip the bundles or box set passes unless you're 100% confident they work internationally. Go with well-known trusted services, the ones you've used before domestically or that are explicitly recommended for tourists in Paris. There were also a couple of smaller things that stood out to us. They weren't trip ruining, but they're worth mentioning. One of them was Uber. We've used Uber all over the United States and in other countries, and it's extremely rare for a driver to cancel on us once they accept the ride. In Paris, that happened more than once. A driver would accept, you'd think you were good to go, and then cancel. When you're on a schedule or traveling with family, those delays add up quickly and can be frustrating. The other thing, and this one gets talked about a lot, was the attitude from people in Paris. I want to be clear here. This wasn't everyone. We met some very kind people, but compared to other European cities we visited, there was a noticeable difference. In Paris, we ran into more instances of rudeness, impatience, and even conflicting information, especially from people in official roles who you'd expect to have clear answers. That part surprised us. In other cities, if someone didn't know an answer, they'd usually say so or go out of their way to help. In Paris, we sometimes got advice that was flat out wrong or contradicted what another official had just told us. It wasn't hostile, but it didn't feel welcoming either. Again, none of this ruined the trip. It should come as no surprise that Paris is an extremely popular destination. It's actually the most visited city in Europe, with roughly 17 million visitors every year, and it ranks around 9th among the most visited cities in the world. And honestly, once you're there, it's very easy to understand why. Paris is absolutely beautiful. The buildings, the architecture, the layout of the city, everything about it is visually striking. Almost every street feels like it could be on a postcard. That said, Paris is still a real city and you do see signs of poverty. It's not overwhelming, but it is there. You'll encounter people begging, and just like any major city, you do need to be aware of pickpockets and use basic common sense precautions. What I will say though is that we never felt unsafe at any point during our trip. There was a noticeable police presence throughout the city, and at many of the major historical sites, there was even a military presence. From a safety standpoint, that was actually reassuring. There were plenty of moments where my kids would wander off to go buy something or explore a nearby area, and I never felt concerned about their safety. Overall, Paris felt busy, crowded, and very alive, but not unsafe. Like any large, heavily visited city, you just need to stay aware of your surroundings. If you do that, Paris is a place you can really relax and enjoy. Even though earlier in the video I really went after the Paris metro, the reality is we still used it a lot. For the most part, the metro was how we got around. We didn't take the bus very often, and we only used Uber sparingly. Most of the time, the metro got us where we needed to go, especially into downtown Paris. One thing that really helped was biking around the city earlier in the trip. That gave us a good sense of the layout of Paris, so once we were underground on the metro, we had a decent idea of where we were and where we were going. That made navigating a lot less intimidating. As far as cost goes, if you get a metro pass, it's not dirt cheap, but it's also not outrageously expensive. If you're in Paris for about a week, you can get a weekly metro pass for just under $35 US. That gives you unlimited travel across the entire Paris region, and it includes buses, trams, and trains running Monday through Sunday. For us, that ended up being a really good value and covered all of our transportation needs. When it came to figuring out what train or bus to take, Google Maps did all the heavy lifting. We'd punch in our destination and it would tell us exactly what to take and where to transfer. That said, and this is really important, you absolutely need a working cell phone while you're abroad. In an earlier segment, I talked about how my phone stopped working overseas and I ended up relying on my kids' phones. Without a working phone, navigating the metro would have been nearly impossible. Between directions, timing, and figuring out routes on the fly, having a functioning phone is essential if you're going to move around Paris efficiently. A big part of this trip for us was eating out. We did have an Airbnb with a full kitchen, which helped a lot. To save some money, we made breakfast at home every morning and we packed drinks and snacks for the day. The grocery store was literally a 1 or 2 minute walk from our apartment, which was incredibly convenient. Most days we'd be out exploring, so we ate lunch while we were out, and almost every night we went out for dinner. And honestly, sitting down and having a Parisian meal is a big part of being in Paris. Paris is known for a lot of things, but food is definitely near the top of that list. Now, I'll be honest, I have a pretty basic palate, so I probably don't appreciate some of the finer details the way my wife or my daughter do. But even for me, the experience itself was fantastic. We ate at several restaurants where you sit outside at those little cafe tables right on the sidewalk, and it was just great people watching, great atmosphere, and really relaxed. As we walked around Paris, it felt like restaurants were everywhere, and so many of them just looked absolutely picturesque. Eating there feels much more leisurely compared to the United States, where meals often feel rushed. In Paris, people take their time and you're expected to do the same. When it came to fast food, we really didn't see much of it, and the fast food places we did see were noticeably different. For example, when we went into places like Popeyes or KFC, there wasn't traditional fried chicken like you'd expect back home. You'd see chicken strips or patties, but no legs, thighs, or wings, which I thought was strange. We did come across a McDonald's here and there, but overall, fast food just isn't a big thing, and honestly, I think that's a good thing. Part of traveling is getting away from what you're used to, and that includes the food. Even when we were in the grocery store, we were buying items we didn't recognize or weren't accustomed to at home, and that alone felt like an adventure. Eating in Paris wasn't just about the meals themselves, it was about slowing down, trying new things, and really soaking in the experience. When it comes to buying stuff, Paris is a major European city, so there were absolutely no issues using credit cards. Credit cards were accepted pretty much everywhere we went. We did bring some cash from home, and that was mostly because we knew we'd be buying things from street vendors, and also because in some places you need coins to use public bathrooms. So having some cash is important, but honestly, not much. For the most part, cash was almost irrelevant. You could easily travel through Paris and really most major European cities without using cash at all, as long as you're sticking with trusted merchants. That said, you do tend to pay a little more when you're using cards and shopping in stores versus buying from local street vendors who are usually cheaper. Even so, I wouldn't worry about bringing a large amount of cash. One thing to think about is not overdoing it with cash, because you don't want to leave the country with a bunch of it left over. One of my kids made that mistake and came home with foreign cash, and by the time we converted it back to US dollars and paid the transaction fees, it was basically worthless. And also keep this in mind, Banks in the United States will exchange foreign paper bills, but they will not touch foreign coins. Coins are essentially useless once you're back home, so make sure you spend them before you leave. As far as shopping goes, we did make it to the Champs-Élysées, which is one of the most famous shopping districts in Paris. It was really impressive. Huge, wide sidewalks, beautiful buildings, and lots of well-known shops. There's just a lot happening there. And at the very top of the avenue, you've got the Arc de Triomphe, which makes the whole experience even better. If shopping is something you enjoy, the Champs-Élysées is definitely a place you're going to want to see. Like any major city, Paris has plenty of tourist buses, especially in areas where people are flocking to see the sights. For us, since we had spent time biking around the city, we already had a good lay of the land, so using a big tour bus just to get around wasn't really necessary. That said, if you want an audio guide to help explain what you're seeing as you go, the buses are a great option. There are plenty of companies offering tour buses, not just Big Bus. They all stop at the main historical and tourist landmarks, places where you might want to hop off, explore, and then get back on. A ticket for the Big Bus runs about $45 per person. For a family of 4, that adds up, so for us it wasn't really worth it, but it's definitely an option if you want the convenience. One nice feature is that the Big Bus tickets can often be bundled with other attractions like a Seine river cruise or entry to a historical site. So if you plan to combine tours, it can actually save you a little money. One thing to be aware of with tourist attractions in Paris is lines. They can be extremely long, and it's hard to predict how quickly they'll move. We went to a couple of spots where the line was just too long, and we ended up leaving and moving to somewhere else. Waiting, deciding, and moving on all takes time, so it can eat up part of your day. The best advice is, if there's a must-see location for you, try to get there early. Hit the big attractions first and save smaller or secondary stops for later in the day. Timing of your trip also matters. We were there in the summer, which is fantastic weather, but it's also the busiest time of year. You'll deal with crowds and congestion almost everywhere you go. If you want fewer crowds and still nice weather, consider visiting in the spring or early fall. It's cooler, less hectic, and still very pleasant. As for how long you need to really experience Paris without feeling rushed, I'd say around 4 to 5 days gives you a solid sense of the city, lets you see the main attractions, and still leaves a little time to explore neighborhoods and enjoy meals at a relaxed pace.